Thank you for joining us on this broadcast. As I mentioned today, we are focusing on the adoption process in this country. And our question of the day to you is, have you tried to adopt a child? How was that experience for you? Talk to us. That hashtag is a new normal on our social media handles. And of course, you can also reach us using that number at the bottom of your screen. But before we get to it, let's take a look at the impact of COVID-19 around the world. This morning, those numbers stand at 64,194,640, or rather 74 people confirmed to have contracted COVID-19 around the world. Now, out of that number, 44,441,249 have totally recovered from the same, and we have lost 1,486,829 people globally to COVID-19. In Kenya, well, that number stands at 79,322 confirmed cases of COVID-19 this far in the country. And out of that number, 52,974 have totally recovered. And unfortunately, we have lost 1,417 Kenyans to COVID-19. Well, remember, those numbers keep changing, and unfortunately the trajectory seems to be going higher and higher, so please do take care of yourself by taking all the necessary precautions to avert the contracting COVID-19. Now, let's take a look at some of the stories making headlines this morning. And a delegation of Nigeria's Senate, headed by Senate President Ahmed Lawan, visited the northeastern Borno state, where an attack on farm workers killed dozens of people at the weekend. Borno governor also attended the burial of 43 people on Sunday in the nearby village of Zabamari, saying the death toll could rise after such operations resumed. The victims included dozens of laborers from Sokoto State in northwestern Nigeria who had traveled to the northeast to find work, and 6 were wounded in the attack and 8 are still missing. Now, to a conflict that we have kept an eye on, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says the Tigray region's dissident leaders had fled west of the regional capital after weeks of fighting, but indicated federal forces were monitoring them closely and would attack them soon. Abiy, winner of last year's Nobel Peace Prize this month, ordered military operations against leaders of Tigray's ruling party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, in response to what he said were TPLF organized attacks on Ethiopian Federal Army camps. More than 3 weeks of fighting between federal soldiers and pro-TPLF forces has left thousands dead in the northern region and prompted tens of thousands of refugees to flee across the border into Sudan. And still on that same conflict, on Saturday night, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared military operations in Tigray completed after the army claimed control of the regional capital, Mekelle, a city of 500,000 before the conflict broke out 3 weeks ago. Now, I had the news yesterday on Ethiopian state television, but I don't believe it, said refugee Mongosto Dekele, who sought refugee status in Sudan's Village 8 transit camp near the border. Now, Dekele added that we will only believe if it is confirmed by Tigrayan media. Tigray has been under a communications blackout throughout the conflict, and media access has been restricted, making it impossible to verify claims. Elsewhere, Senegal has been widely praised for its handling of the coronavirus pandemic, with few infections and life returning to normal. But the reason behind its success still divides experts. The government enacted a raft of antivirus measures when the pandemic reached the West African nation, but some experts believe that herd immunity may explain the low level of cases. With a mostly youthful population of some 16 million people, the country has recorded some 16,000 coronavirus cases this far and 331 deaths to date, according to the Health Ministry. Now, the government closed 8 borders, schools and mosques when the virus first hit in March, as well as banning large gatherings and travel between cities and imposing a nighttime curfew. It also undertook medical care for ailing COVID-19 patients and aggressively isolated people who had come into contact with positive cases.
Ça, c'est les cas de contamination, les nouveaux cas qui ont été enregistrés. La première région touchée, suivie de la région de Thiès.
Now to something that puts us in focus of our conversation today. And a missionary accused of sexually abusing 4 girls at an orphanage he ran in Bomet County will most likely spend the next 16 years in a federal prison for his crimes. Now, this follows Gregory Dow's guilty plea in June of this year to 4 counts of engaging in illicit sexual conduct with 4 girls between 2013 and 2017. Now, Gregory and his wife Mary Rose fled the country after grim details of their cruelty to minors under their care became public. Ngena Kirori with more.
Gregory Dow has admitted guilt for 4 counts of sexually abusing children, girls aged between 11 and 13, who were under his care at the Dow Family Children's Home in Boito-Konoin constituency, Bomet County. 61-year-old Dow reached a plea deal with the prosecution. The prosecution, led by U.S. Attorney Timothy Stengel, argued that Dow used force and coercion to perpetrate the most heinous of crimes, preying on vulnerable children for his own sexual gratification.
How many times were you sexually abused by Mr. Dow?
I was like 3 times.
His wife, Mary Rose, was not arrested with him, but court records show that she was mentioned several times for aiding, abetting, and participating in cruelty to children. The prosecution says that Mary Rose knowingly subjected children to birth control implantation at a local clinic in Mogogo Shiek. The prosecution submitting that this was aimed at eliminating the possibility of pregnancy. The orphanage had up to 83 children between 2008 and 2017. The children were subjected to the most inhumane conditions by the missionaries, including being denied basic rights. They were never taken to hospital when sick, in the belief that faith would heal them. As a result, 3 children died of various complications. One of them, identified as James, was hurriedly buried in a box here, within the compound and without a permit or due procedure. Another, identified as Amos Kipchirir, died upon being denied medical attention. His family is still seeking answers to this day. Gregory will be sentenced to jail in September 2020 and is likely to serve at least 16 years in prison as a result of the plea deal. This development, some form of relief for the victims. For a man who had earlier been accused of molesting his own daughter in 1996, many wondered how Kenyan authorities allowed him to set up an orphanage in Kenya and take in tens of vulnerable children.
It is clear this guy did a lot of crime in the country, but the government is following laid down procedures.
Dow fled Kenya in late 2017 to escape arrest. Mary Rose, on the other hand, was apprehended and served time in jail, but was released after a few months after paying a fine of 50,000 Kenya shillings. She too fled the country.
Children have for long periods continued to suffer in the hands of those who should care for them. And despite the spike in cases in places that should be safe for them, authorities continue to turn a blind eye to their plight. Tens of thousands of orphans and vulnerable children across the country. Gena Kirori, NTV.
Well, I'm sure you do remember that expose that NTV actually brought to you sometime in the year. And it is interesting that out of that, we got to learn a lot about the adoption process and also the orphanages in this country, who actually governs the same and what it entails for these children to be placed in these institutions. Now, we'll be touching on some of those parameters. And to help us understand better the adoption process in this country, in studio with me is Beatrice Sawe, who is a member of the National Adoption Committee and also an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. In the other studio, we have Frederick Mutinda, who is a project director at the Changing the Way We Care. Virtually, we are joined by Belinda Taka, who is a manager at the Alternative Care Services at Buckner, Kenya Adoption Services. And also joining us virtually, we have Andre Karithi, who is an adoptive parent and also an adoption advocate. He'll be telling us more about that in a moment. Thank you all for joining us on this very crucial conversation. And I think the most important place to start with is the fact that this year we saw the Family Division of the High Court come up with a booklet, Adoption Process Simplified, to actually provide guidance to prospective foster parents on adoption. Why was this important, Beatrice?
Well, that was very important in that it helps to sensitize, to make prospective parents or anybody who has been thinking about adoption more aware of the requirements. They would beforehand get to know what they need to provide, what information they need to provide, who qualifies, yes, to adopt, and what is the procedure or what forms are there that they need to fill and which documentation is required. I think basically that is a role that is played by the Chief Justice of Kenya in providing processes, forms and procedures that take place in the court where a person applies for adoption.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, most people believe that this is such a complicated process. Most have given up on it or not even started to start with. Do you believe now this simplified version will give more access and opportunities to more people?
Yes, I believe that when the structures are in place and the process is simplified and explained and sensitized to the people, then they will find that it's actually very easy. It's not as complicated because every step and process is based on the law and it's guided. And the relevant persons or officials or institutions are in place to aid, actually. So, yes.
Okay, from your experience, is adoption something that is done often in this country?
Yes, adoption is something that is going on. It has been going on for a long while. It is just that the adoption process is mostly a private process where the privacy of the people concerned is very important. Whereas the processes are not, hidden or private. Once an adoption process commences, there is a lot of privacy. In the court, the proceedings are held in private. And in fact, in some cases, either an adoptive parent can actually ask to be kept anonymous. And there is no advertisement for adoption. If you want to adopt a child, you're not allowed to advertise that you want to adopt a child. When there is a child that's up for adoption, it is not allowed for an advertisement that that child is up for adoption. So it's very important to let people know how to go about it.
Okay.
But other than that, adoption has been going on, and it's going on.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, we'll talk more about the processes of this adoption process even as we go on with this conversation. Let me cross over to Frederick. Now, the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child, which Kenya was among the first to ratify in Africa, actually states in Article 20 that the state is obliged to provide special protection for a child deprived of the family environment and to ensure that appropriate alternative family care or institutional placement is available in such cases. Efforts to meet this obligation shall pay due regard to the child's cultural background. Frederick, why is this critical?
Thank you so much, Gladys. I think this is critical because there is very clear efforts within the government on how do we safeguard the rights of those children who find themselves without parental care. And I know you mentioned a list of alternative family care placement, and at the end you also mentioned institutional placement. That was when we were ratifying the UN Convention on the Right of the Child. But over time we have seen several changes that have come up, and UN is now really promoting more of family-based care. And last year in 2019, there was during the General Assembly, the United Nations General Assembly 2019, there was very clear commitment on how do we continue promoting family. So the reason why all these alternatives are placed is because you find sometimes biological family might not be an option for the child to go back home. But we know from the African culture, we have other forms of alternative family care that can be brought in. For example, we have kinship, which is the extended family. We have also other options like foster care, which also within this country we have some regulation on how to go about that. But however, I want also to mention on the option of institutional placement. This is mentioned as an option, as a last resort, and not really children below the age of 3. This is really discouraged because of very clear evidence of psychological impact and developmental effects of institutionalizing children who are below the age of 3. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll delve deeper into those concerns of placing children in an institution. Let me bring in Belinda. Now, many people, especially couples, unable to have their own children, opt for adoption to build or expand their families. From your experience, is adoption really for everyone?
Grace, I would say yes and no, but just like parenting is not for everyone, that is biological parenting, I would say also adoption is not for everyone. Most importantly, we have to be self-aware of where we're coming from, why are we doing it, and is it just because somebody else did it that we want to do it? And so I would say no, adoption is not for everyone.
Okay, from your experience, what are these reasons that parents come to you to adopt a child? What are the reasons behind it other than not being able to have a child of their own?
The other reasons are a desire to expand their families. Let's say there are issues of maybe secondary infertility, whereby maybe a parent or a family has 1 or 2 kids and they desire to have 5 or they desire to have 4. So that is another reason. The other reason would be just to add or maybe to support a child. There are families that clearly have their own biological children, but they still would like to support a child by adopting them. So those are some of the reasons that I would say that bring people to the adoption agencies like Partner Kenya.
Would you say that you are seeing more adoption requests today than before?
Absolutely. there is a spike. There has been a spike in the past, in the last 2 years, I would say. More, especially in 2020. I may not really give the reasons as to why, but I would say there has been a huge increase of people seeking to adopt in the recent past.
Okay, and we'll get to understand better why it's happening today more than before. And this is also coming from that question of the day we sent out to you, is if you've tried to adopt a child in this country and how was your experience, please speak to us. That hashtag is new normal. Now to Andre, who is actually the adoptive parent in this conversation. Andre, why did you decide to go down this road?
Well, for my wife and I, we had decided that we would adopt even before we had children. So this was a conversation that occurred while we were still in courtship. And eventually, when we got married, we had made that decision that at one time during the course of our marriage that we would adopt. However, about 4 years down the line, we were not able to get biological children, and for medical reasons. So I approached my wife and asked her whether we could consider taking up a child so that we could start our family. And that's how 6 years after into marriage, we filled out the forms and were able to bring in our first child into the family.
Okay, and how many children have you adopted so far?
We have 2 now, a girl and a boy.
Okay, all right. Congratulations to you. And you'll tell us more about your journey in a moment. Now, Frederick, we have talked about the reasons why parents would want to adopt, or adults would want to adopt children. What are the reasons as to why children end up in institutions of care?
Thank you, Gladys. We have several reasons that children will end up in institution of care. In 2019, we did work closely with the Department of Children's Services and conducted a situation analysis just to understand what are some of the push and pull factors in 3 major counties here. That was Kisumu, actually 4, Kisumu, Kiambu, Kilifi, and Nyamira. And among the top reasons that came up as push factors are issues of poverty to some extent, which was really cited a lot by the families and also by the managers, but also we have a high number of children who go to this institution because of abuse. Others are going to institutions mainly to seek education, and we have seen that many of these children, they just go to this institution because of no other reason other than education. However, due to mushrooming institutions that are coming up across the country, we have also seen others who are going to this institution because of other intention, for example, trafficking, and also there were mention of some of those institutions trying to get these children for the purpose of placing these children for adoption. And I know this is quite an issue that really needs to be understood fully, and we are trying to see how best then do we address some of these push and pull factors that are sending these children to institutions. Yes.
Okay, and for you, Belinda, you are an adoption agency. The children you come across, what is, or a majority of the backgrounds that you see, those that are being touched on by Frederick?
A majority are those that are abandoned. That's the biggest percentage. And abandonment could happen because of many reasons. It could be poverty, it could be maybe the child was born out of incest. It could be maybe the child had a medical conditions. And so there are so many reasons why a child could be abandoned. The other percentage of children that we always place for adoption are children that have been offered by their parents, where their parents decide to relinquish their responsibilities over their children. So those are the 2 main categories that we deal with.
Okay, and for those that are willing to relinquish their responsibilities, is it because of poverty?
Yes, we have had a big number of those because of poverty, but there are also other reasons, like, let's say, a child born out of incest. And I would say there has been an increase in that. And ideally, if a child is, if a parent is willing to relinquish their responsibilities over a child because of economic reasons, that really is not a tangible reason. We are always held back by the law not to go ahead with that because of situations can change along the way. And so mostly, unless the situation is dire, that is when we can come in. But mostly we seek for other avenues or other ways to support.
Okay, all right, we are having a technical hitch with Belinda's connection. We shall work on that and get back to her in a few moments. But at this point, I think it is imperative that we understand this adoptive process that we talk about. And there is a whole process and parameters that each of every adoptive parent, or rather prospective adoptive parent, needs to follow for them to qualify to be an adoptive parent. Now, to start with, I'd like to know, Belinda, do you have a choice on the child you adopt? Like, would you walk into an orphanage and say, this is a child that I'd like to adopt? Or what's the process?
Beatrice.
Beatrice,
Yes.
sorry.
When a prospective adoptive parent approaches the adoption society with a view to adopting children, they are not allowed to select a child, but they have preferences that they have indicated. And it is upon the adoption society to match the child, that parent to a child who is within the institution or at any of the other homes that are working with the institution. So there is a big attempt to ensure that all the children have an opportunity to be adopted. Unless maybe there's a very specific request by an adoptive parent that they would like to adopt a special child, a child with special needs. And that is when now maybe they will look at more specifically what are those special needs that this person is looking for, because there are people who come out to request to adopt such children. But otherwise, it is maybe there is a lot of uptake of girl child, apparently, and I do not. It is upon the society, the agency, the adoption society, to ensure that there is a balance in that opportunity is given to all the children who are available there as much as possible. That is their responsibility.
Okay.
Yes.
Andre, I'd like to hear your experience. Why are you given an opportunity to choose the children that you have now, or it had to be, or they had to be matched to you?
Sorry, in our first case, when we adopted our daughter, at that time, there were no restrictions to selecting your child. So you would walk, after you've gone through the adoption agency, you would be invited to one or other children's home, and you would be able to select your child. So in our case, we wanted a girl, and we went to one of the children's homes, and we had several options, and I let my wife do the selection. For me, I was quite open in whichever child would be, she would pick. But in the second case, the rules or the laws had changed, and so at that time, then we had to take what the adoption agency told us was available. And we were happy with that decision as well.
Okay, how old are your children, Andre?
Our daughter is 14 now. She was 8 months when we adopted her. and our son was 15 months. He's 10 years old now.
Now, do we have Belinda back? Okay, now Belinda, there's something that Beatrice has brought up. The fact that it seems that society is more keen to adopt the girl child than the boy child. Do you know why? What have you heard?
I would say mostly cultural factors. Let's say if a girl has a child outside of wedlock, and if they are to get married, they are more acceptable into the new family when they have a girl child as compared to when they have a boy child. And so you realize that there's always that imbalance. Apart from that, also, there are issues still to do with culture when it comes to inheritance. It's easier probably adopting a girl because maybe a girl will not need inheritance at the end of the day. They will be married off. So if you look at all that, it all stems from our own cultural background and experiences. And that kind of, it tends to lead when most parents are coming to seek for adoption.
And Frederick, does it mean that these caring institutions then have a bigger population of the boy child than the girl child?
Thank you. And actually, even before I go to that, I also want to mention that globally, according to UN, we have almost 8 million children who are in these residential care facilities, or rather sometimes referred to orphanages. And here in Kenya, we are talking about the known number of 45,000 children in 854 registered institutions. And from the situation analysis that was conducted, actually it's true, 54% of the population in those institutions were boys, and 46% were girls. This might be because of various reasons, but just to mention, just as my the earlier presenter said, one of the things that we have seen in other cultures, there is what we call those traditional way of adoption, that they actually prefer boys because of different reasons. But the problem is that those are not, they are illegal to me because they don't go through the legal processes, but they are done in a cultural way. And maybe we might speak more to that as we proceed. Thank you.
Okay, now let's get into this adoption process and understand what it is that you need to actually qualify for the same. So Beatrice, what are the requirements of for a prospective applicant? Where do you start?
Well, we start at the provisions of the Children's Act, which determine who can be an adoptive parent. We start with the age. An adoptive parent should be at least 25 years of age if it is a sole applicant, and should not be less than 21 years older than the child that is available for adoption. And that adoptive parent, prospective adoptive parent, should also have not attained the age of 65 as at the time of the application. Secondly,
okay, perhaps I can stop you there. Why not beyond 65?
Well, because I believe it has more to do with the time that you are and energy, yes, and resources that you are able to provide. In raising a child, you have to be energetic. They look at maybe how, by the time that child is in high school or wherever, how old will you be, So it is better to, it's easier and even better for a parent who has not reached 65 years to adopt a child, because then they can be able to parent that child properly. Yes. Okay,
so there is also a part where it says or speaks about relatives who are eligible to adopt. Yes. So in what case is a relative eligible to adopt a family member?
Yeah, well, if a child is abandoned for instance, it is very important to try and trace family members, because at the end of the day, adoption should be the last resort. And the best place to raise a child is home with its own family. So if a child, for instance, if a child is born by an underage, a minor member of the family, then there are those options before it is even considered to offer that child for adoption. Maybe a parent has come up to want to offer that child, but the society will want to investigate and look around if there is a parent or a family member who is able. If it is confirmed that there is any capable family member does not want to take that child, then that child can be offered to adoption, for adoption. But if there's a family member, that is actually the first step, opportunity to do the kinship kind of adoption. And it is only once that there is no one within the family who is willing to take the child, then that they go outside of that. And that is an opportunity for children who are within the family sector.
Okay.
Not children whose family cannot be traced.
Yeah. All right. So in the same category, most often than not, especially in our African society here in Kenya, when such circumstances are there where a child is abandoned and the family members want to take them up, most of them don't go the legal way. They just assimilate to the family member.
Yes.
So what are the risks of doing that later on in life?
Well, it is part of the usual. There are several types of alternative family care options, and kinship exists as an alternative family care option by itself. I think it needs to be more regulated, maybe more, it should be, there should be regulations on how that can be checked so that it's clear how the children are being taken care of within that section. But it has been happening and it will continue happening.
So what are the risks?
The risks are the rights of the child, ultimately, because in, like the Constitution says, in any matter relating to a child, certain things are very important and paramount, and they take precedence to anything else, and that is the interest of the child. So that child who is under the care of somebody who has not taken steps to formalize that care is exposed to certain risks. Risks of violation of their rights. They might not have access to education, which is one of the rights of a child. They might be exposed to, labor, unfair labor or hazards. They might not develop, they might not be develop their self-esteem, that they would get in a healthy environment. And that child might even be deprived of basics like food and be exposed to labor and unfair labor and all that. So there are so many risks when children are not put in a safe family care environment. Yes.
Okay, and Frederick, what is this that the legal process offers the child? What makes the difference that the adoptive parent would not actually contravene the rights of his child?
I think just as mentioned by Beatrice, adoption process, there is a lot of vetting, there is a lot of ensuring that the child will be in the safe hands. And for it being permanent and irreversible, I think it provides that opportunity for the parent to know that there is that commitment and they actually acquire full parental responsibility. And when that is not regulated, like I know there was a mention of kinship care, which at many times is not regulated, but I want to mention as part of the process of reviewing the Children Act, now that we have Children Bill 2020, that is now well mentioned, and we do hope from the submissions that we made there will be strong regulations on how do we handle these other alternative family care like kinship. And I say so just because, as Gladys you said, is that many family members, when maybe something happens to the biological family, we do take care of these children, but of course there are several risks. And we've seen during this pandemic, around 29,000 children were sent home within a month to the first case when it was reported from these institutions. And more than 50% of these children went back to kinship care, not their biological family. Mm-hmm. So how do we ensure that no matter the alternative care placement that we'll be putting this child, mm-hmm. what are the measures that are put together by the government and by the law to ensure that there is enough safeguards for these children who are in those families?
Mm-hmm. And Belinda, still understanding the requirements for prospective adoptive parents, what are the parameters for single parents in this process?
Single parents are allowed to adopt a child of either sex, but more specifically, we are looking at if they are to adopt a boy, for example, a boy has to be at least 4 years. We have not had, let's say, single parents who are male coming to seek for adoption, but mostly it has been single parents who are female. And so the parameters, the requirements are that we do the vetting and the assessments as an adoption agency, but when it comes to the choice of the child, then if they choose to have a female child, mm-hmm. become an early age, as compared to when it's a boy, it should be at least from 4 years. That's the limit.
Okay, and how about the married couples? What are the parameters?
It's quite open for the married couples, as the law stipulates that a child at least 6 weeks is adoptable. Mm-hmm. And so it's open for a couple that is seeking to adopt. So whether they choose to have a female child or a male child, that is open for a married couple.
Okay, let's hear from Andre. So when you decided to go down this road, you said you gave your wife an opportunity to select your daughter. But when you look back through the whole process, was it easier perhaps because you were married? Kindly unmute your mic, Andre.
It's actually unmuted.
Now we can hear you. Now we can hear you.
Great. Yeah, so I was saying that as a couple, it's much easier. Of course, being able to take care of the child is easier when both parents are within the home and providing care and, protection and all the needs that the child requires. The beauty of it is that, once you adopt this child, you really don't feel a difference between a child that's adopted and a child that you may have gotten by biological means. The bond between you and this child really is so natural that you really wonder after you've started why you even took time to decide to adopt. In fact, in our case, we wished that we had been informed by the adoption agency or even the children's homes that we could adopt more than one at a go. Because if we had adopted them as if they were twins, then that would have, grown the family much more. We would be able to be a blessing to, even more children. Mm-hmm. So really our hope is that this information can be brought out, that people can actually adopt more than one child at a go. So yes, it is easier when you're a couple. Say in the cases where, say, one couple or one of the members of in the family loses a job, then the other one is able to provide that balance. The child is not affected in terms of their provision because at least the other parent does have a job. When challenges come, you're able to stand together, you're able to support the child and support one another as a family. Mm-hmm. So it's really desirable when you're a couple to adopt.
Okay, interesting. Now, Beatrice, persons that are not qualified to adopt, which are they?
Well, obviously, a person who has attained 65 years is not qualified. The other person is a homosexual. That's according to the Act. A homosexual person is not qualified to adopt a child. If a person has been convicted of some offenses which are in the Act, maybe sexual molestation and that kind of offense, then he will not, he or she does not qualify to adopt a child. A person in the event of a couple applying or seeking to adopt, if they are not married, then they will not be allowed to adopt a child. They have to be, if jointly, then they have to be a husband and wife.
Oh, so you cannot be dating and
you
then
cannot
apply
be dating
for...
and apply. Yes. A single lady is allowed is allowed to adopt a child, but a single male from a different country cannot adopt a child.
Why?
Well, the idea is to give out, to give children up for adoption to families. Yeah, so the Act is very reluctant to give a single male who is not a Kenyan, who is a foreigner, a child. Because the child needs to move. The idea is the best alternative to the home, to the blood family. So where is that? It has to be in another family, especially if it's out of this country.
So the assumption is that a single male in this country is attached to an extended family here.
There is a possibility to that. Yes.
All right.
Yes, there is a possibility. There is support. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And Belinda, if one spouse suffers from mental illness, somebody is asking, would that disqualify the couple for the adoption process? Belinda, please unmute your mic.
I am unmute now.
Okay.
Yes. During our vetting process, we usually give a provision for counseling. And during the counseling, we involve a professional who is able to meet the couple. And by that, we are able to know, even from the onset, before we place a child in that family, that there is a problem. It could be psychological, it could be emotional, it could be any other thing. And therefore, if there is proof that there is a mental issue, then we cannot go ahead and place a child within that family. Because at the end of the day, we are protecting, we are mandated to protect the rights of that child, and we want to ensure that they are in a safe environment whereby they can grow and develop as they should.
Okay, and how about chronic illnesses? If the couple or one of the spouses has a chronic illness?
It depends with the kind of illness. There are many couples that we have placed children into their families that have illnesses. And that is why it's usually encouraged to be open when coming to an adoption society, to tell us about your medical. That is one of the requirements, actually, that you have to bring a medical evaluation to us so that we are able to ascertain the ability to take care of a child, even with the condition that you might have. Conditions such as HIV and AIDS, those are conditions that are being managed quite well. And we have been able to place children with couples or the individuals who have HIV and AIDS. The bottom line is that the condition is being managed to an extent whereby we know that they are still living normal lives and they are able to take care of that child as it ought to be.
And Frederick, it's interesting that we say we cannot place children in a home where we feel that any one of the spouses is not mentally fit to cater for them. Yet, a lot of the children that find themselves in orphanages or any other care homes actually are as a result of these families. Yet you're saying you'd rather the family than the institutions. How do you strike the balance?
Thank you. Yes, it's a difficult balance to strike, but it's doable. And we have seen countries that have been able to do this. And that's why we have different alternative family care options that family or children might be considered for in case one doesn't work. We have adoption. If adoption process maybe might not work for one child, then there is an option of foster care, whereby still within the institution and the Department of Children's Services, this child can be placed under foster care. Of course, for Muslims, we have the option of kafala, and we have other options, like, for example, if we have a person who is willing to take care of this child, then under guardianship, then some of the children who might be 17, 18, 19, because of the extended parenting, they can also be placed under supported independent living. So the idea is to ensure that there is proper child assessment and proper family assessment before that decision is made to remove this child from institution to any form of placement. And with that assessment, then it determines what is the best option for this child. Because at the end of the day, we are also trying to avoid these children overstaying in this institution. And if you allow me, I'll give an example of one of the care leaver that was speaking in a radio station from the areas of Kilifi, and care leaver being people, young people who were brought up in institutions, but they were sent back home and they now have to fit in the society. He said that he feels that it doesn't fit in that society that he was taken back because he had stayed in this institution for quite some time. And when he went back, he needed school fees for secondary education. The community could not fundraise because they say they don't know this child. They had to produce a photo that was taken 10 years ago of that child for the community to know that this is their child. So there is also that sense of ownership while also deciding what's the best option for these children.
Now, quickly, before we take a break, what's the difference between foster care and adoption?
Adoption, as it was mentioned, it's permanent and irreversible. And for foster care, here in Kenya currently, it's a short term. The care order is for 12 months, but it's renewable. But this is a process that is done together with the manager of the children's home and also the Department of Children's Services at the field level. And this child, the family is also assessed, and the child is placed there, and then over a period of 12 months, there is constant supervision to ensure that this child is putting on well in that family. If the family or the couple needs to renew the foster care, then they are allowed for another 1 year again to renew. And of course, that process, although it's short, and after attaining 18, then the couple or the person who, the foster parent, doesn't have any legal obligation to continue taking care of this child.
Interesting. Okay, now we take a short break, but when we come back, I'd like to hear from Andre how that vetting process was for them, because there's a rigorous process that goes into ensuring somebody is qualified to be an adoptive parent. But before we get to it, I hear you're talking to us on that hashtag New Normal, even as we asked you if you've ever tried to adopt a child in this country and what was your experience. We have Wayne Nyoike, who says, I adopted someone's child when she was in college. We have been blessed with a child of our own together. Thank you. Thank you, Wayne, and bless you. Jennifer Jenga says, Mimi naweza taka, but I don't know where I can get one. Well, I guess that's why we're having this conversation, to give more information on the same. Nyamuringa says, some Kenyan men wouldn't even support you if you had a child that's not his. It's mostly due to economic crisis if they adopt, mostly because they feel obliged to the community, especially if it's a dead relative. Like, you feel you should support the children. I hear you, Nyamu. Ben says, why would I? Interesting question. Remember, adoption is not for everyone. Kwaisan says, what is a procedure? And that is what we're breaking down this morning. Anthony K says, what's the process of adopting? I love the fact that you are putting across these questions because we are addressing them. And Jennifer says she would also want to adopt a child. Do we have another? Mwakulomba says, I'm not white. What do you mean? It's not only foreigners that actually adopt children. Kenyans do adopt children. Another myth that we need to actually bust. Samuel Osuwat says, my experience was interesting, but at last he has changed, became a man and married a local gospel artist with one child now. Interesting, Samuel. Moses Kariuki says, it worked well, but village rumor mongers can't let it settle in peace. The child will be brainwashed forever. Moses, you touch on the stigma that comes with adoption, and that's something else we'll be talking about in how you integrate these children into society. Well, we'll be back right after this short break.
Director, you also need to put a lot of consideration when it comes to preventing the spread of the coronavirus, especially here in the all right. Yes, and I think that's what I learned. When you do get a sneeze or you feel like coughing, take a tissue paper, put it on your mouth and in front of your nose and sneeze into it, then roll it down and throw it in a trash can.
We are Nation, Africa's independent media brand. We are committed to empowering all Africans, from the young to the old, from the curious to the educated, and from the heart of the cities to the rural areas. We are Nation. Join us, because if you want to get far, you do it together. Nation. Empower Africa.
Acha nikae kwenye mpini, hafi njaa.
Na kila mmoja ana riziki yake.
Mimi vile na hustle hivi, hii ndio jasho langu.
Kila Jumanne katika NTV jioni utapata makala maalum ya Jasho Langu, kuangazia raha na karaha, heri na shari za watu katika kazi na vibarua mbalimbali.
Mimi Max Riala, na kuunda glass ndilo jasho langu.
Na hii ndio jasho langu.
Naitwa The African Dogman, na hii ndio haso yangu.
Nami ni Daniel Mule, na hili ndilo jasho langu.
Every spoonful of Nutri comes loaded with the necessary vitamins, protein and minerals for you and your family to become healthier and stronger. Pick up a pack today from your nearest store. Nutri, every spoonful counts.
Thank you for staying with Your World. My name is Gladys Gashanja. Today we are talking about the adoptive process in this country, and a lot of questions coming through as to how you can be part of this process. How do you go about it? Where do you start? And that's what we are breaking down this morning. And to help us do so, Beatrice Sawe in studio. She's a member of the National Adoption Committee and advocate of the High Court of Kenya. We have Frederick Mutinde in the other studio. He's a project director, Changing the Way We Care. Belinda Taka, who is a manager at the Alternative Care Services at Bakna, Kenya Adoption Services, excuse me, and Andre Karithi, who is an adoptive parent. Andre, what was the process like when they were vetting you if you were a suitable adoptive parent?
Yeah, like you said earlier, the process was quite rigorous. And of course, we knew that we had to go through it, much as we would have preferred to just be given the child and take the child home. But initially, we went to an adoption agency, and we told them that we were interested in adopting. So they scheduled a meeting where we went in and we were both interviewed together, and then at a separate time separately. So each spouse separately, and then both of us together. And really it was for them to establish why our interest to adopt, and then also whether we had, considered the implications of adopting. I told them, yes, we have discussed it for a long time, and we were really interested in doing this. They delved into, our socioeconomic background, our educational background, our family background, our attachments, who we are related to, and so on, where we live, things like that. And eventually they were satisfied. Then they told us that we would get visits from the children's home, the children's department, as well as the children's home. And these visits were done. At that time, of course, we were quite young, and we didn't know whether we would qualify because our finances were low at that time. We had just entered into employment, and we thought perhaps they're looking for people with a big house, 4 or 5 bedroom house and so on. Like the person who commented there saying, I'm not on Zoom.
Yes.
Because that's really the impression that everybody has, that, you need to be really rich to adopt. But we were asked to relax, just show yourself the way you are, present yourself as you are. And that really helped us to relax. So they came in, saw our house, asked us where the child would be sleeping. We had bought a small cot, and we said this is where the child would be sleeping. It was a very small house then. And then they did a report, the children's department did a report, and said that we were suitable for adopting. Then following that, we then needed to go to court, where we got court dates, and we had somebody the court calls a guardian ad litem. We also were asked to get somebody who would stand in for our interests, like the next of kin. And we were successful through both processes for Tiffany, our daughter, and Jonathan, our son. I must say also that because of the support that we got from our extended family, our brothers and sisters and our parents, I think that also helped the adoption agency and the children's department to give us even more support, because my family and the family on my wife's side were very, very supportive. And I think those are the things that the adoption agency, as well as the children's department, will look at to see that the child's interests are protected and that this child will live in a very normal environment when, they get adopted.
Okay, Andre, quick one. Was the process repeated when you were adopting your son?
Oh, absolutely. And though it was much easier. I mean, we could see that the adoption agency, we went to the same adoption agency, and we could see that they were very relaxed the second time, very happy that we actually came back. So the whole process had to be repeated again. But of course, they will refer to your file and see that you are still, say, in employment or you are in business. My wife was in business then. Whether you have moved from where you are living to another location. So they will just verify a few things, that you haven't gone to court or not really gone to court, but whether you haven't been involved in crime or incarcerated. So they'll just verify certain things, but then if all is okay, then they will allow you to adopt. So we went through the same process again, and having already had an initial experience, it really went well for us.
Okay, so Belinda, Andre, and of course, as we said, one of the feedback here was the feeling that those who can qualify for this process are the rich in society. So when you say you go in to check the condition of the prospective homes, what are these parameters you're looking at?
The most important thing that we look at is the environment of the home and being able to assess it vis-a-vis the development of a child. Is this a suitable environment for a child to develop in? It doesn't matter whether it is a mansion or whether it is a one-bedroom house. What we are looking at is, one, yes, the suitability of the environment, but also the ability of these individuals who are adopting to parent this child. I think those are the two leading factors that we are seeking for when we do home assessments and when we do the vetting during the process of adoption.
Okay, and in the case of the referee information that is needed also to help along the prospective adoptive parent, how do you ascertain that these people are actually genuine?
We make random calls. We may not be able to kind of get permission from the adoptive parents, but we make random calls to all the people that they have listed as referees, family members, and even friends. So we want to make sure that this is not just a process whereby somebody picked up the forms and they sat down in their living room and filled them out by themselves and brought them to us. We want to do all the background checks and make sure that it is not just one individual or maybe two individuals in case of a couple that is involved in the entire process of adoption. Because adoption is not a secret, we usually prefer to look at it that way. We desire to involve as many people as possible because a child is safer when they are accepted within a family and within a community as compared to or by a couple seeking to adopt.
And how about the economic status? And I think this is where most people feel that this process is beyond them. So if I live in a small house and I do not have a job, probably have a small business, are these things that you would be hesitant about because you're not very sure about if I'm a good provider?
Economic situations vary on different people that come to seek for adoption. But what we are looking at mostly is that there is the promise, or maybe we can look at maybe their economic situation and say there is a potential for this individual or this couple to take care of a child. And just like it is in a normal setup, or maybe in when a biological child is involved, you plan for a child. You cannot just wake up one day and say, I'm pregnant, and you're not taking care of the antenatal care, the vitamins that you need to take, and all that. So we are looking at how prepared are you as a couple or as an individual to take care of this child that is coming into your family. So whether you have $1 million in your account or whether you have a little amount of money, what we are looking at is your preparedness as an individual. As for the case of, let's say, an individual who is either in employment or in business, we look at also the potential of their growth. But more specifically, if it is something that can be secured, let's say, is this business registered? Is this establishment licensed? Those are some of the things that we also look at because we are looking at a permanent process. It's not a process that we just do in a wishy-washy way. We are looking at 10, 20 years down the line. How is this able to probably support this child?
Okay, now this process has been shrouded by a lot of illegality because there's some who go through the whole process, some others do not. And if you remember, for the tens of thousands of children who for one reason or another do not have the privilege of growing up in a biological family setup, placement in alternative family care gives them an opportunity to live a normal life. Now, such was the case for two minors, one who was placed with an American couple and another with a Kenyan couple. But after years of custody battles in and out of courts, the government has withdrawn these two minors from their alternative families. Why did the government take them back? NTV Investigates filed this feature back in 2016. Taking a deeper look into the flaws of the adoption process, here is an excerpt from Court to Court. The whole feature can actually be found on YouTube. Take a look.
There was a point in which you wanted to take the baby out of the country, supposedly for medical attention. Can you tell me something about that?
We basically sought leave of the court because we had a medical report, at this point many medical reports from many medical facilities saying that he would benefit from being seen by a specialist outside of Kenya.
In their application to the court to allow them fly baby Jonathan out of the country for specialized medical care, they attached several medical reports. As guardians, they were not allowed to leave the area of jurisdiction with the minor, coming at a time when the blanket ban on inter-country adoption was already in force. On 7th February 2018, Magistrate Otindo allowed the couple to travel with the minor on certain conditions. That their Kenyan employer undertakes that the couple will return with the minor. That they serve the court and the Kenyan embassy in the UK with the residence of the child while over there. And that the Kenyan embassy and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs be served with the orders for enforcement. But the couple opted not to travel in spite of getting leave of the court.
That they needed to essentially indemnify that we would return with the child. The issue became that I don't have a Kenyan employer and neither does Daisy, and so there was no one to indemnify. And when we went to basically get we had someone take a look and see whether or not it would be a problem to apply for a visa. We were told, look, unless you can comply 100% with this provision, which it doesn't sound like you can't, don't apply, because if you're rejected for a visa, it becomes very hard to get one in the future.
They later wrote to Labour and Social Protection Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani asking for special consideration to allow them fly the child to the UK. Instead, the CS constituted an advisory committee chaired by one Ngei Mutinda to look into the case. The report highlights irregularities in the process of acquiring guardianship and, alarmingly, that the child could have been a victim of trafficking in the process of flying him out.
Court to Court, an investigative piece done by Edmund Nyabola back in 2019 that brought to the fore some of the loopholes in the system. And Beatrice, I think it's good to actually clarify this point. Are foreigners in this day and age allowed to adopt in this country?
Currently, inter-country adoptions, which are adoptions by people who are not Kenyan citizens, are not going on. That is because there is in place a moratorium which was placed by the government on those adoptions until further notice. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay,
but it actually states in that booklet that if the foreigner is married to a Kenyan, then they can be able to adopt.
Well, when some people, it depends. If the foreigner is resident in Kenya, then that is different. Then that becomes a local adoption.
Okay.
But if the foreigner does not reside in Kenya, and they don't intend to reside in Kenya, even with maybe the Kenyan, if the Kenyan has acquired foreign citizenship, then that changes the whole perspective. The message of that moratorium is prevention of removal of the child who is within Kenya out of Kenya. That is what the moratorium sought to stop, removal of children from Kenya. So if anybody applies to adopt a child with the intent of taking that child out of the country, then it is not going to happen right now.
Okay.
Yes.
And in this case, and somebody is actually asking, if somebody could actually just marry a Kenyan and be able to adopt, wouldn't this give the system a loophole where marriage can be used to
Yes.
as an adoption, just like people get married for visas?
Yes, people have actually been known to marry Kenyans, reside in Kenya briefly, marry a Kenyan, do an adoption, and because right now the intercountry adoptions are not happening, they go the local way, and then they are forced to stay here because it is not an intercountry adoption. Yes, they cannot take the child out.
So the law states that you cannot leave the country with this Kenyan child?
They cannot.
Okay.
The moratorium prevents that from happening currently.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Frederick,
so anybody taking a shortcut will just have to face the consequences of that shortcut. Yes.
Now, Frederick, even as we talk about foreigners, we know even Kenyans themselves normally use shortcuts. And that's why we mentioned earlier in that investigative piece, there is a family, a Kenyan family, where the child had to be taken back to the mother. What is your experience in this, and how does this impact these children?
Yes, we cannot deny the fact that we have people who want to take shortcuts in terms of acquiring these children. And we have seen a lot of expose, we have seen a lot of cases that have happened. And I think what that brings is that at many times when it's done through shortcuts, the child doesn't get enough protection in terms of how do they continue developing. And even as I speak, I also want to mention one thing, that even before you make that decision to take a child to any form of alternative family care, whether adoption, foster, or which one, somebody really needs to be quite sure what is the motivation. I've seen even from the tweets, people saying, I don't have money, but we know families that have each and everything that they need, but they cannot be able even to provide for their biological family because there is that attachment. So I think the issue is, how do we ensure that when that decision, we have proper gatekeeping mechanism within the systems that will make that decision on when and what, on how to place this child. Remember, as per the UN and the guiding principle within this alternative family care, we have two critical principles. That's principle of necessity. We first need to, as we make that decision, to ask ourselves, is it necessary to separate this child from the biological family? Two, it's the principle of suitability and appropriateness. The placement that we want to do we have all the services? Is it appropriate? Is it suitable for this child? Thank you.
Okay. And Belinda, somebody is saying this process has been shrouded by a lot of corruption, and that's why it feels like it is a preserve of those who are wealthy, where the wealthy come, they go through the process, but the process seems faster for them because they can actually oil the system. How do you ensure that there is actually fairness in this process despite and in spite of where you come from?
Thank you. We try as much as possible to remain objective, and thereby we do not look at individuals when they come through our doors depending on their economic status. What we are looking for is homes or families that can be, that are willing to take in children who are in institutions. And so one of the things that we usually look at, the main guiding factor is, why are you adopting? I think throughout this process, unless your motive comes out clearly, why you want to adopt, then it kind of gets a bit sticky dealing with that individual. And there are many that we reject also. I cannot say confidently that everyone that comes through our doors will go through the process successfully. So we vet, we look at the economic situation, not because we want to see how many or how much you have in your account, but we are only looking at how stable or the ability financially that you have to take care of a child. We are also looking at other things, other factors, like your mental stability, your psychological stability, and all that. We are looking at, do you have a support system around you that is speaking socially? Is your family aware that you are adopting? Is your church, let's say, just to give an example, is your church aware that you are doing such a thing? And are they also open to the process? So it is not just the economic bit that we are looking at. We are looking at all the facets of an individual or a child that would grow and develop to become a citizen of Kenya with all the support that they can get.
Belinda.
So it is not just for the rich.
Belinda, do you have a follow-up system that ensures even as the process comes to a conclusion, the adoptive parent gets this child? Does the system follow up to ensure that these people followed or kept to the promises they made or to the parameters that were asked of them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to follow up. We have, I can give you an example of an adoptee who is now 19 years of age, and we've been following him up for all these years. The reason why we follow up is because we want to also assess ourselves and say, have we been successful with the placements that we do? Because we do not just want to sit back and fold our hands and say, once we have placed a child within a family, then that's it. We do follow up. There are the 3 mandatory months right after placement that we do follow up. But even after the legal process has been completed, we still do follow up with our clients to make sure that the children are doing well, the families are doing well. If there's anything that has changed, then how can we support, or what kind of help can we give to them in order to make sure that at the end of the day, the family is stronger to support the child, and also to make sure that the community is involved. So we do follow up for as long as we can.
Okay. Now, Beatrice, this process is one that is also costly because you have to go through the legal system. It takes a while in court before it is actually decided on. And this is something that is also, or removes the chances from many Kenyans. Talk about the cost of it.
Well, of course, every adoption has some cost attached to it. The prospective adoptive parent has to make payments, certain payments, including the costs of an advocate who will file the adoption application in court. I'm sure there are other costs that or charges that are paid to the Adoption Society towards the arrangement of that adoption. Yes, the costs, especially the legal costs, are have been found or have been said to be on the higher side and rather taxing on the adoptive parents. And the adoption societies have certain arrangements. Maybe Bakna can give more information on that. Certain arrangements for legal services, pro bono, provision of pro bono services to the adoptive parent. So they have arrangements with the child welfare, you know, other legal organizations or advocates, maybe like there are organized, there are legal establishments like the Cradle. There are also Law Society of Kenya also offers pro bono services, and the adoption societies are the ones now to reach out to those legal entities towards obtaining fair legal services or pro bono services to the very needy applicants. There is probably need to do more in that area, so that adoption does not look like it's a preserve of only those people who can afford. Yes.
Okay. Now we're about to take another short break here on Your World, and I hear you're still talking to us on that hashtag New Normal, even as we asked you about your experience in adopting in this country. We have Wayne Nyoike, who says, adopting a child has a 50-50 luck. You may adopt a child who will end up successful in life and help you a lot, but at the same time, you may adopt a child who will turn out to be your worst nightmare in future. Think critically before making a choice. And Belinda will be telling us if they also undertake counseling, because this is one permanent situation that people need to think through before they get into it. And we'll talk more about that in a moment.
Raukia siku njema na tunukiwa offers kila siku.
Piga *444# utunukiwe Credo double.
For an exclusive fragrance experience, try Nivea Men Deep Impact Body Lotion with a long-lasting woody fragrance, deep moisture, and a fresh skin feel. Make an impact with Nivea Men Deep Impact. Nivea Men, it starts with you.
Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory you can open an account and lipa pole pole at your convenience? Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory you can get customized sizes according to your roof plan to avoid wastage? Did you know Ruiru Mabati Factory offers free delivery countrywide within 72 hours?
To order, call us now on 0111 050 700. Ruiru Mabati Factory, mali safi kwa bei poa.
May God bless us and bless Kenya as we strive to become one nation, one people that are going to grow and celebrate each other. Let us celebrate our unity.
I came for you. Oh, now stop playing around and let's go home.
Somebody help!
Shut up! I've had it up to here with Miguel. Always looking over my shoulder and blaming me for everything that goes wrong. Don't touch me! Stay still!
How can this animal be your friend?
It's one thing to be his friend, but I'm not required to change his behavior.
Well, then you should learn to choose your friends better.
Jichanue na data statements kujua vile bundles inatumika on Kenya's best network. Dial *544# and select check balance. Kumbuka pia, the first time you access your data statements, una get 200 MBs completely free.
Every spoonful of Nutri comes loaded with the necessary vitamins, protein and minerals for you and your family to become healthier and stronger. Pick up a pack today from your nearest store.
Nutri, every spoonful counts.
It is your world. My name is Gladys Gashanja. Even as we understand the adoptive process in this country, now in September, the children's officers in Machakos County intercepted a middle-aged woman suspected of child trafficking. Now, the suspect, identified as Tina Mulinge, had reportedly made a deal with the mother of the child to buy the baby for 1,000 Kenyan shillings. Now, DCI officers began a probe into the suspected deal, and the baby is now under the care of the Children's Department, while the two women involved in the transaction have been detained, awaiting court charges. Another 5-year-old girl has also been rescued from the same suspect, awaiting investigations, and has been taken to Machakos Rescue Center.
Men should be very vigilant now because haya ni mambo mapya ya kwamba watu wana collude na vitu zina happen na wewe uko hapo. You think this is your child, na there is a story behind it. So as a department, we are going to protect those children, tukingojea directions from the court.
Now, Frederick, I know you're very big about advocating for family setups other than these institutions of care that children end up in. And even as you push for the prevention of a child-family separation, how do you ensure that this happens in circumstances where poverty is clearly key? And as you've heard from that story, it's even giving life to trafficking in this country.
Yes, I think that's a very good question to think about. And what I can say is that as much as we are advocating to, actually this is a government directive on moving away from reliance of institutional care to family-based care. And we are there to support the government to see how do we then make this a reality. The truth of the matter is, this is not going to happen overnight. It's a process that is going to take time. However, we also need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what are some of these things that are leading to this situation that the children are finding themselves in? And I know at many times poverty is quoted. But if poverty is quoted as a reason for separation of these children, I'll ask, why then do we have thousands of children in areas like Kibera, in areas like Mathare? I know families that have really committed to take good care of their children because of poverty. So we always need to understand, if there is a danger, then the immediate concern is how is the safety of that child. And of course, if the danger is coming from the biological family, then that warrants removal of that child from that point of danger, if it's the biological family. But the question is, if we are removing that child from the biological family, is it a must that we only place that child to an institution? And the answer will be no. That's why we talk about how decisions are made. Can we have a list of potential foster carers, potential alternative family carers, that even within those counties, when the child is rescued, then there can be a placement to a temporary placement within another family as we see how to go about the case. Not necessarily taking this child to institution, whereby at many times even we have seen institutions who collude with some of these perpetrators to ensure that children are brought to the institution and then they fall through the crack and they cannot be traced where they are. We have a good number of institutions, orphanages here in Kenya that are not registered. And that's a big concern because it means even the regulation point of view, then that is not done well.
Okay, so isn't it imperative that if those in these health facilities come across a mother who looks desperate in as far as probably not sure if they can cater for their children, probably give them information about the options that are in nurturing this child.
Yes, thank you. And just to tell you, some of the efforts that are going on at the national level is that through the National Council for Children's Services, they have convened a multi-sectoral team that comes from different government agencies, health, education, police, judiciary, civil society, to see how do we address issues that are leading to separation at different sectors. And maternal health facilities are critical components to dealing with early abandonment or maybe trying to stop this separation of children, because we have seen many cases whereby children are either trafficked or separated at that point. So it needs intervention at different level, not only at the Department of Children's Services alone. And that's what we are trying to do. And as we speak actually today and tomorrow, there is this multi-sectoral team is meeting in Machakos just to come up with very clear social behavior change strategy on how do we demystify some of these myths like we are seeing even from the tweets.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Beatrice, I think at this point it's important to list the registered adoptive agencies in this country. I understand there are only 6? I can probably go through the list and you can tell me if I am correct.
Well,
I'll start off, of course, with one that is represented here, which is BACNA Kenya Adoption Services, right?
Yes. Before the current adoption committee came in, before the term expired in February 2019, there were 6 adoption societies which were registered. Remember that every adoption society has to renew the registration every 12 months. And so because there was no adoption committee in place between February 2019 and until the gazettement in April 2020, there were no renewals, neither were there registrations. But before that, there were 6 adoption societies in Kenya, 5 within Nairobi, and 1 out of Nairobi, that's Meru.
Okay.
And you can understand also that once we as the adoption committee came in, we had to prioritize registration of the adoption societies. It is actually one of the mandates of the adoption committee to register the societies so that they can arrange the adoptions. So yes, we have already, that was the first task of the committee. We have already, we are open to applications. We have received and approved some of those applications already, including BACNA. And we are looking into other applications. The other society that has been, that is already approved is the Kenyans Peace Initiative Adoption Societies. We are looking at several others which are on the table, and very soon we will probably have a total of maybe 4 or 5. Hopefully we'll attain the 6 and more, because whereas Nairobi has the potential of having 5 adoption societies or even more, then the rest of the country does not have them. Like I said, it's only Meru out of Nairobi. Outside of Nairobi, it's only Meru that has had an adoption society before. Hopefully they will be coming for registration as well. And it's good to note that other charitable institutions which have been in operation are also, it's open for them to come and apply to operate as adoption societies.
Okay,
yes.
So that at least we can have these services scattered around the country.
Yes.
And let's get back to something that was also brought up in one of the feedback that we got earlier on. And Andre, I think you'll be best placed to answer this question. Was there a concern about the background of the children you adopted? Kindly unmute your mic.
Do you mean concern from the extended family?
Before you even get there, when
Yes.
you were adopting these children, did you ever
Yes.
stop to think, okay, fine, I have a child here, but I have no idea where they come from? Was that a concern?
For us, not really. Fortunately, because of my urban upbringing and having been socialized, with people from various communities, I totally did not have that as a concern. And we know the background of our children, and we didn't even consider it. It wasn't one of those things that really, went into our minds. But then at the extended level, you will have people asking you, are you really sure? Do you really want to go in that direction? And these are questions which, as a couple, you sit down and say, you have to agree on how to address those issues. But for us, we were very protective of our decision, and then eventually even of our children, that we wouldn't want anybody to ask where did this child come from. We just told them, well, they were born from the heart, and that's all you need to know. So yes, people will want to ask out of curiosity. Others, a few of them with bad intentions or intentions you don't understand. But then you tackle it as they come. Because even for our biological children, somebody will say, this child has big ears, and none of you have big ears, insinuating all sorts of things. So we looked at it as if this were our child born of us from our heart. And, they've turned out to look just like us. I mean, the boy looks like the mother, the girl looks like the daddy. And, it turns out normally. It's how God works it out. So
Okay.
for us, it wasn't really a concern.
All right. Now, I see you have great intention like any other parent, but these children are part and parcel of a bigger society where they will hear from one person or the other, family member or not, that they were actually adopted. So have
Yes.
you ever told them they are adopted, or do you ever intend to tell them that they are adopted?
Thank you very much for that question, Gladys. I think it's a very important area that adoptive parents must consider. And it has been a big topic even amongst a support group or support groups that I belong to. I belong to two. One is the Adoptive Families Association of Kenya, a registered entity, and another one is the Children of Home Support. And in both support groups, you will find parents asking, or potential adoptive parents asking, and even those that have adopted, should I disclose? It's a whole topic of disclosure. And my position is that it's important to disclose to the child. In fact, the law says that it's the right of the child to be informed of their birth. So we did this with our daughter while she was 5 years old, and it doesn't have to be at 5 when you inform them. But it's good that when they are cognizant and they can reason, then it's a good time for you to start bringing out the issue. So we did that in our own way, and by the time she was 9, we had spoken to her severally about it. We did the same with our son, but I must say, with the girl, she's tended to understand it more than the boy. For him, he looked like he was not concerned. Even up to now, at 10, he's really not bothered about it. But we do watch, we try to expose them to it. They know that they are adopted. We watch movies that have an adoption story. Fortunately now there's Netflix and all this, and there's a lot of that on the net that you can watch and expose your children to it, have that discussion. It really helps them to settle so that when they hear it out there, and they have had it, and we have discussed it in the house, how to respond to it, and ask them to just take it normally, explain it as if it was just a normal life incident. But you are normal as any other child.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Belinda, even as you take these prospective parents through the process of adoption, do you ever counsel them because of all the intricacies that come with taking this road?
Yes. we do counsel them and we take it quite seriously. Apart from the counseling, BACNA Kenya also has a curriculum for training that is pre-placement and post-placement. And the reason why we put this in place is because we saw the need. There is an increasing need, especially after placement, because the counseling is usually done before placement. That is to assess the viability and also the potential of the adoptive parent, prospective adoptive parent. But at the same time, it's quite different when you're getting it in theory as compared to now when you're experiencing it after the child has been placed within the family. So we take it quite seriously that we have a curriculum that talks about issues to do with trauma, issues to do with the brain development of a child, issues to do with parenting, behavior, discipline, and all that. So it's a full curriculum that we have, and we take it quite seriously as an agency.
Okay, now before we move on, I understand that we have some feedback coming from that hashtag New Normal, even as you let us know of your experience in adoption in this country. Etta Ray says, I'm currently going through this process. The lawyers are sometimes exorbitant. I have been quoted 500,000 shillings. Are there caps to lawyer fees? There are con lawyers too. How do we weed these out? There are unlicensed agencies. We need to weed these out too. Good one. And they also there are a few court days designed to adoption cases. So you find a person like me going on the second year in the process. Delays in children's department should be checked. What I would advise others not going through this is to not mock those for one reason or another who choose to adopt. There are families that will reject the child and others that will accept the child, no holds barred. It is natural and it is okay. Do what you have been called to do. You are doing the right thing. We hear you and thank you for being candid on the same. So again, the question is, how long is the moratorium going to last? How does the adoption work for a Kenyan married to a foreigner? Is that a foreign or local arrangement? And also still on the same feedback, adoption at first is a selfish act. You want to be a parent, you think mostly about you, but during the process, you realize it is about the child. You're being called to give a home, love, care, and protection to this child, which is all about serving the child and not your ego. Very well said. And I think, Beatrice, at this point, it would be important to understand, why does it take so long for some couples? What would be the factors fueling such?
There are various factors at different levels which affect the adoption process. There is the first process of the due diligence and investigation. When prospective adoptive parents seek or approach the adoption agencies with a view to adopting a child, then sometimes maybe they don't avail themselves completely to the process, and so it takes time. They take time out, they come back, or they go back to the agency. Sometimes maybe they give certain specifications, you know, of the kind of child they want, and that child might not be available at that time, that particular kind of child. And from my point of view as a member of the adoption committee, there have been delays in the last, for the last 1 year. There has been a delay because the adoption societies were not registered. They were not licensed to operate. So it has taken parents, you know, the process could not move at all until now. This time, I believe things will start moving in terms of, as far as the Department of Children's Services is concerned and the Adoption Society is concerned, things will move. The judiciary, much has been done by the judiciary to try and ease, you know, the speed of cases, the expeditious conclusion of matters, but there are so many factors that affect the court process. Maybe things like on the date of the hearing, the parties themselves, the applicants themselves do not understand that they must attend court. Certain delays, like there is a requirement to appoint the guardian ad litem who is supposed to represent the child in court. There is delay or there is misunderstanding in that, and it takes another, you know, more time, bearing in mind that the children's court has many other cases to handle. So I think it is important also to at some point to inform the prospective adoptive parent of, you know, these processes and how they can contribute to make them more speedy and expeditious on their side, and also to explain to them factors that may affect the expeditious conclusion of the matters. There are investigations in between. Maybe there is the placement period of 3 months. There is a lot that happens, which is done by the adoption agency and also done by the court. The court has to satisfy itself as to some certain things before it makes the final adoption order. Yes.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're bringing this conversation to a close, and I'd like to hear feedback from you briefly about some of the issues that we have raised, and we're bringing a conclusion on. I'll start off with you, Frederick. You have been, again, very keen on ensuring that we enhance the family setup as opposed to these children growing up in care institutions. How do you intend to actually rope in the stakeholders to understand, as you say, it is actually more expensive to raise a child in an orphanage than it is at home?
This is going to happen in conjunction with government. As we speak, we are working together with the National Council for Children's Services to develop a very clear care reform strategy that will be able to guide this country on how do we proceed in terms of ensuring that we are reducing over-reliance of institutional care. And we have examples across the world that they have really managed to do away with institutions as a way of care. And one of them, a country like Rwanda, they managed to transition all the children from institution back to family-based care, and the community are taking care of these children. And we have other examples across the world. So the care reform strategy is almost being finalized. It will be approved by the government, and that will be able to guide us. But of course, as we continue in these different counties, we are also having very clear engagement with other stakeholders, including the charitable children institutions themselves. And some of them, they have really agreed to start transitioning to family-based and community-based care.
You also mentioned there are risks of these children being raised in these institutions. Apart from the developmental part of view, there's also being finding themselves falling into social ills, right?
Yes. So part of the stakeholder that we work closely with is Kenya Society of Caregivers. This is a group of almost 600 young people who are raised and brought up in institutions. And they have come out to really try to advocate for more family-based care. And part of these challenges that they face is, one, apart from even this, apart from the social issue, there is also economic issue. Some of them, they overstay in these institutions. They come back to the society. They don't have the proper life skills. And even from our research they did, they are also saying that they found that out of the 10 caregivers that are out there, 7 of them will always struggle to get an employment because there wasn't enough preparation for them. But of course, we have some few successful cases, but success is not about the physical success, but it's also about the internal and emotional success for them to become productive citizens and adults.
Thank you. And Belinda, definitely the adoption agencies have been on the spotlight in as far as this process is concerned. Your parting shot. Unmute your mic. I cannot hear you.
I am on mute now.
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Yes. All right. I would say adoption is not an emergency, so it has to be a process that is thought through. Also, there is need to continue educating our people in regards to adoption, because I believe that in order for us to scale down the height of stigma that has been there in the past in regards to adoptions, there is need for education to be continuous. And then the last thing also I would say that there is need also for all stakeholders to come together to work, I cannot say 100% seamlessly, but we have to strive towards that. Yes, we have made large strides in terms of adoption, but there is always room for improvement. That includes the police, it includes the medical fraternity, it includes the children's department, it includes all other facets, including the children's institutions. So in order for us to make sure that every child is raised within a family, all of us have to hold our hands together and ensure that this happens.
Thank you. And of course, to the adoptive parent amongst us who is also an adoptive or adoption advocate, Andre, what is your encouragement to others that intend to take this path?
I think I would encourage as many spouses as possible who are hoping or are thinking about adoption to go right ahead and do it. I know right now the process has been slowed down because of legal and structural issues, but by all means, visit your adoption agency or your adoption society that is nearest you. Make your application. Of course, you'll be on the waiting list, but it's better to do that as a commitment than to just sit back. Then also find a support group. Find a place with other parents who are like-minded, who are seeking to adopt, to get that support. And I would encourage you to join Adoptive Families Association of Kenya, AFAC, that is on Telegram by the same name and on Facebook by the same name, so that you may get support to know how to deal with social issues, legal issues. I mean, that exploitation that is going on about paying 500,000 shillings for legal services. You will be helped to find lawyers who are sensitive and reasonable in their charges, and a lot of social support to understand how to go through the process. So there is support out there for you to understand this process. It's not impossible, and I can tell you that it's such a blessing. It changes lives, both of the parents, and affects society in a positive way.
Thank you, Andre, and we celebrate you this morning. And of course, Beatrice, you are representing the National Adoption Committee. Your parting shot in 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. I would wish to encourage the Kenyan public to, whenever they want to adopt a child, or if adoption is an option that they are considering, to follow the legal process. There are structures in place. There is a legal way to get a child legally and to attain all the rights, obligations, and responsibilities in the right way, and to have that child finally as your own through the right and proper channels. And so they should desist from anything and anybody that would want to lead them towards acquiring a child or taking a child illegally. Any process that requires you to purchase a child